Hello, this is The Reasonably Good Life. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brooks. This is going to be the second part of my episode. The first one, it was so big, we had to break it into two parts. It's my interview with Dr. Christopher Ferguson. He is a psychology professor at Stetson University, and we cover how screens are affecting people, especially young people, smartphones, social media. We cover it all. I hope you caught the first part. We cover even more territory than just screens, but it was a very lively, enjoyable conversation, and I hope you enjoy this second part. Again, to listeners, this is, proof of how screens can be used for good, like creating a connection through email and then Twitter and then carrying it on. And then now we have a connection here in our cyber friendship that, if ever I'm in Florida in your neck of the woods, I was like, all right, we'll go hang out.
Although neither of us are outside looking at trees. Maybe this is actually a huge tragedy. It's a beautiful day out here in Florida. I'm betting it is probably where you are too, right? So digging that fence post or whatever.
I did go for a run at the lake with one of my best buddies and had coffee afterwards. So I'm doing the yin yang balance thing, I
went for a walk with my wife already. Yeah. We
go.
We got our outside time. That's good enough.
But so the Dungeons and Dragons we've talked about, and I don't know how much to go into this, but that was one, to your kind of Lord of the Flies. And I like your points there. Is kind of like we do have to be careful. And I tell parents this is like, the only reason we weren't on our smartphones as teenagers because we didn't have them. We would have been on them. Like I know I would have been all over, and there would have been pros and cons. I probably would have driven my parents nuts, but that was one of the things. And I want to get before I go back to Dungeons and Dragons is this hasn't been studied much, but this is kind of my anecdotal observation. Is anytime you see, kids on the screen a lot and you make some correlation between their depression and anxiety and say, oh, well, the screen must have caused it because they're on it a lot, right? Okay. However, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in the family context. And what I find is it's not necessarily that the kids are on the screen a lot that is causing the problem. It's the friction and conflict with their parents over the screen time that can cause a lot of damage. So even if they're not using it that much, but they're constantly getting criticized by their parents of like, oh, you're wasting, there you go again. Yeah, you drive me nuts with it's a waste of time. You should know better. It's like the kids feeling all that. So yes, they're on their screen, but is the screen causing the damage? And I really haven't seen many studies. I don't know if I've seen any try to parse this out, because as their screen time goes up, my hypothesis is so often does the parental criticism and friction and that might be the culprit or the greater culprit. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, there are a few studies. They never get any press because nobody wants to talk about parenting. But
no one wants to talk about that.
There are a few studies that look at like parenting styles, like terms of like parental moderation around things like violent media and this sort of stuff. And trying to sum it up kind of quickly, I think it all kind of boils down to like you don't want to be completely ignorant of like let your kid do anything, but on the other hand, being super authoritarian also doesn't really work very well. Like being super restrictive doesn't work very well actually. And kind of like it seemed like the parents that did the best were the ones that kind of would like co-play a lot. I'm thinking in terms of video games, would either co-watch or co-play a lot, and then would kind of treat like controversial material as like a dialogue, so sense of like, okay, so you're playing Grand Theft Auto, what is it about Grand Theft Auto that appeals to you? Can you see any reasons why people might object to Grand Theft Auto? Do you think you're at an age where it's reasonable for you to be exposed to some of this stuff? So you kind of have this dialogue with kids, and that tends to work better. Sometimes the kids will say, well, yeah, I can kind of see where at like age 12, maybe some of this stuff is, made for adults, and maybe I should wait a year or two at least to, to watch it, to play it. Some kids might be like, no, I'm fine. That's fine too. But I think having that process of actually, like, this sounds all like super like huggy squeezy, like,
Gosh,
like
Chris, look at
parenting,
you. Look at where you've gone down this road.
But communicating with your
No,
kid,
I'm with you
pretty
there.
good,
I tell parents that what you want to do instead of like managing it all from a top down is collaboratively problem solve, like come up with reasonable limits and expectations and stuff like that. But like on cyberbullying or something, instead of like flipping through their phone and like looking at everything they've done, which I have a real problem with, like by default, I'm like, don't do that by default. But you want to create the type of relationship with your child that they will talk to you about if they got bullied or stuff. And, another one I say, instead of telling your kid, like you're addicted or, I'm like, don't say that, but I like to ask kids is like, do you know anyone who you would say is addicted to their screen?
Yeah.
What makes you say that? What about because invariably I'm not addicted to TikTok or Instagram, but I know this girl or I know this, it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. What makes you say that? Because they don't have to get defensive about their use if they're talking about their, a friend or someone they know. But then that's the sort of red lines, like about the McDonald's. They're all talking and a conversation a parent might have, but instead of criticizing or jumping in, you talk to them later. Say, I noticed y'all were all on your screens and you were talking, how did you feel about that? Did that bother you? Or you okay with it? No, it was fine. Does it ever bother you? Is there a time, well, if I'm trying to tell something important and my friend keeps pulling, those are really rich conversations, so instead of like waving the cane, talk to your kids, try to create, and don't make the entire, I'm kind of, preaching out loud here, but, just to also get your thoughts is what I see happening is parents focus so much on the screen. Sometimes they don't invest in the overall relationship. I like the saying rules without relationship equals rebellion. Like you invest, don't try to manage the screen time and say, this is your duty as a parent. Your best thing you can do as a parent is create a good relationship with your kid. Focus on that. Quit focusing first on the screens. I mean, that's one of my messages. What are your thoughts? General agreement there?
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think, sometimes it helps too if like, don't just take the screens away from your kids. If you want to help them moderate, come up with other attractive things for them to do. Not to say like, well, you got to turn off the TV and do what, basically homework or whatever, and that may take a little bit of creativity of coming up with like family, activities that are actually appealing to the teen. You don't want to come up with family activities that are not appealing to the teen,
right.
But come up with something, where you have to go somewhere, I think like ropes course would be a good example where they, you can't really do that with the phone, in one hand and the surfing, going to the beach, something like that. Coming up with something like that to do that sort of, forces them to get away from the screens, but they're also having fun.
Exactly.
While doing it. And they don't have to all be expensive things, it could be simple as going for a walk or going on bikes or whatever, but you're getting that family time and you're giving them an opportunity to see that there are some fun things they can do away from the screen.
Right.
That works better than the judgmentality of
I totally agree. And like that, exposing, having a family game night or, going hiking together, fishing or whatever, cooking, when it helps them realize, oh, I have a lot of fun in this. And I have fun playing video games. I have fun playing tennis. I have fun, hiking, let's have a buffet of things that I enjoy and can plug into, which I'm going to circle back to Dungeons and Dragons. Cause that is, and this might be another episode some other time where we just talk about Dungeons and Dragons, but
I'm down for it. Yeah.
Oh man. It's for listeners who don't know about Dungeons and Dragons. It's, been around since, I don't know, it was the late 70s, early 80s. And I played it as a kid. It's fantasy role-playing game. It's kind of like choose your own adventure on steroids, but you work as a team together, and you can be wizards or clerics or barbarians and fighters, and you level up, and you go on an adventure together, and you have a dungeon master who's kind of the storyteller, creates the environment, and you work together to fight the bad guys and defeat monsters and level up. And, the thing that I remember the first time I played, when I lost my D&D virginity. Can I say that?
Your podcast. You can say whatever you like.
Don't take that out of context, listener. So I remember with my two friends, David and his another guy, Mike, that I'd heard of people playing it, and I must have been like 10. I'm thinking like 5th grade. And, my friend David, we did, what was the intro? It was like B2, the module, oh man.
Keep on the Borderlands.
Keep on the Borderlands. There it is. Keep on the Borderlands. Yeah. Thanks, man. I feel shame. All the D&D people are going to haze me now on social media because I forgot. Keep on the Borderlands. We played that, and it was like the freaking clouds parted. Like I literally couldn't sleep that night. I was like, all I could think about was gimme D&D. Like I could not play enough. That summer I turned pasty pale because I stayed in so much playing Dungeons and Dragons, like all day, every day, and then played with friends throughout high school. And then recently, a number of years ago, when 5th edition came out, I stopped playing once I hit college. Just got too busy, life and kids and all that. But I still held a dear place in my heart for this fantasy role-playing game. And my best friend from youth that I played Dungeons and Dragons with, Tom Richardson, shout out to you there if you listen to this podcast. For my eldest son's 11th birthday, he got 5th edition, like the intro set. And we played that night with my eldest, and then my middle kid. My youngest was too young. He was like a year or something. But oh my God, my kids, we played till 3 a.m. My kids, my friend had to go to sleep, and my kids were following him around the house going, Tom, dude, what do I get? Can I go in here and get this magic thing? And they were so excited. So now we play together when we can. My eldest just went off to college, but we played a ton over Christmas break. And my youngest, he goes, Dad, I like Dungeons and Dragons more than video games. And that's like music to my ears. But like, to me, there is magic there. Like for the percentage of geeky young people that would absolutely love Dungeons and Dragons, but have never played it, I find that painful to think of that disparity. Is like, it's just, in my eldest son's friends started playing with us over Christmas break, and they absolutely fell in love with it. We played, 12 hours straight, we're all just having the time of our lives. And, the kids the next day, instead of video games, they're reading the player's handbook. They're looking at the dungeon DM guide, like looking at magic, and, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's this other world out there that kids, if they're exposed to. Now, it may not be for Dungeons and Dragons for some kids, but it could be Settlers of Catan. It could be rock climbing, or, who knows what is like. And I'm concerned that screens make it so easy to just pick them up and not do something that takes a little more effort, And that's a concern, because I feel like, again, this goes back to the human me and not necessarily the psychologist, but of like, there are these great things out there in this world that could really make a difference, that it might be a lifelong hobby. That they'll never know, that would be so deeply part of their being that they couldn't imagine life without it, and they'll never know it because they just were watching YouTube videos or whatever. I mean, we can't blame it all on screens, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's so easy to pick up a video game or let's see what's on Netflix, and not take that extra effort to sink your teeth into something that could be deeply meaningful and need satisfying. All right, I said my piece there. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the good news maybe for you then is if you kind of look at like the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons, particularly in recent years, is you do tend to see that Dungeons and Dragons and other systems like Pathfinder and this kind of stuff tend to benefit from a lot of the same things as video games. So there has been this like massive explosion, relatively speaking, at least, of people who have been drawn to 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, who've been drawn to Pathfinder. And what you tend to see is like this has been particularly true during COVID-19, right? You know, video games are one of the big, I hate to talk about there being like the winners of COVID-19, but video games were a big winner in the COVID-19 era, but so were role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. So at least in terms of video games, I don't know that they're necessarily competing, with
right. There's they may be feeding each other.
They feed into each other because you got a lot of games, like everything from Baldur's Gate to Elder Scrolls, in many ways sort of, and with Divinity Original Sin 2 that we both play and that kind of stuff.
Fun.
Obviously build upon and there's a new one that came out. I haven't played it, Elden Ring or something like that. I've heard
that's the George R.R. Martin one. It's like he helped instead of writing his books, he's doing
I know nothing about it. I've heard it's good. I've heard it's very good, but
is we'll have to offline talk about that, but so I want to just I'm kind of debunking myself here based on what you said. And listeners may heard, I'm creating a narrative about Dungeons and Dragons and how kids aren't, playing, when actually, if we roll up our sleeves and were to look at the data, they have a very active community on Twitter and social media, and they share their love. They find each other to meet up. I mean, okay, Chris, we're going to make millions off this idea. Ready for my idea?
Go for
it. A Tinder to meet up fellow role-playing game people in your hood. What do you think?
That sounds good. That sounds
good. That's a great idea, right? And it could be, I don't know what you call that, but like
Tinder, exactly. I mean, Tinder isn't that like
swipe left or swipe right, and you can hook up with people around you. It'll populate. I don't know a ton because I'm a married man.
Well, I gotta say, we'll meet to play Dungeons and Dragons, maybe more.
That'd be a blend. Yes, honey, it's just for Dungeons and Dragons. I promise. I know she looks like a seductress, but that's just her cosplay thing that she does with Dungeons and Dragons. But it's not either or, it's another both and of saying, wait, we can't just look at the negatives and make an assumption that screens are displacing all these other activities, because a lot of times they're enhancing them
or promoting them
and you have to look at the whole picture and not cherry pick one aspect of the thing that bothers you most and say that's the larger truth. Well, that may be one little slice of a subset, but what is the bigger picture here? And it would be this, well, actually a lot of people, they go to Comic-Con now and, huge. Back when we were young, it was uncool to be a geek.
It was uncool.
I was in the closet with D&D for like years. I just hid it away. I was like super. Now I'm like, I let my geek flag fly. I don't care. I have Dungeons and Dragons t-shirts, and then I'll wear them to the gym. It's like, I don't care, so what? But it's a great way. It's just, if you use screens, I'd say, and I put this in the book, but I called it to get your needs met. The mindful engagement with technology is sort of a strategic, of asking yourself, is TikTok, what's the return on investment here? what's the opportunity cost of my screen use? Am I feeling good by doing this, or does it make me feel kind of crappy? How can I use it to connect with other kids in the neighborhood to play tennis or ride bikes or, other stuff, and say, just when you're studying, if it's mindless work, sure, you might look at your phone, but if you got some really deep studying to do, maybe it's a good idea to put your phone away and, really laser focus, because all the chips are on the table here with this big test coming up. You need to, and be more strategic versus just reflexively, check, let me get on it, It's hard though, isn't it? Though that's why I feel like with Twitter and my email, I feel like the little, despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage, like pushing the little button to get my food pellet. I keep checking my email. I keep checking Twitter. And I feel like sometimes I leave some of I honestly, my productivity on the table. I'm not working it's not that because you have all these tools that can make you more efficient and more productive, but then there are these other distractions folded in there that take you away from your work. And it's like, ooh, it's hard, right? I mean, I know this stuff. I'm a psychologist. I wrote a freaking book on it, and I still have trouble not checking Twitter. And, and that's why I've told you, it's like Twitter sometimes I can't stop myself from checking. Like once I get into like a back and forth, I'm like, what'd they say? Ooh, I want to do that, that Seinfeld episode. Did you ever watch Seinfeld?
A long time ago when it was out.
That episode with George, the jerk store called, and they're all out of you. It's one of those where you want to get that last line in. This will zing him. I got him. I got him with this in my mind. It goes into this little obsessiveness, and that's kind of a weakness for me. I can get a little, so I've got to like sometimes go, no, let me back out. I'm just like getting in the weeds with it.
I think I've gotten better about that in recent years, and that I usually try to disconnect if things are getting. I mean, if it's a constructive debate, I usually will keep it going. But if it's people are starting to, as soon as somebody like starts name calling in any way, I'm out. That's got to be the end of it. Because I think there are people that kind of are purposely trolling and trying to get other people angry, so that other person will eventually, people when they're angry, they say stupid stuff, and of course in cancel culture environments like today, that's all people are waiting for you, is to say that one stupid thing so that they can, sort of tear you down, ruin your life, whatever.
Right.
So that's kind of a danger thing. I did want to really quickly, I want to circle back to the D&D real quickly and just point out also that I think if you asked, Wizards of the Coast, for instance, particularly if they felt like they were competing with social media and they were answering honestly, I think they would say no. I think they would say that if anything, particularly YouTube channels like Critical Role and stuff like that, where they actually play on YouTube, have been like free advertising for them, if anything, So I think they probably would probably say that they're not really worried about that. But of course, I don't speak for them. But in terms of productivity, I mean, you raise that issue of like you could be more productive or whatever. My thought about that is, so what? I mean, you're going to get the same 6 feet of dirt at the end of your life for being more productive, as you would as if you were lazy. The reward is exactly the same. So if doing something involving screens is making you happy, but you're producing less widgets, but you still can feed your family and that kind of stuff, right? Who cares? Why not enjoy life as maximally as you can? That doesn't mean like quit your job, because that won't mean that you're going to enjoy your life maximally. But if you can produce 150 widgets and get rewarded a certain amount, or you could produce 70 widgets and get rewarded basically the same amount, but you could have more fun because you're playing more video games or Dungeons and Dragons, or even hanging out on Instagram or Tinder, whatever the heck you're doing on
whatever.
Who cares?
Well, I think that's a valid point and argument of, if you're having fun, who's to judge how one is, but I guess the question is, we need to slow down enough to ask ourselves that and say, am I really getting good juice out of this? And for me, like checking email throughout the day while I'm working, like ideally I check in the morning, maybe once at, noon, once more at 5, and like checking while I'm trying to write, it breaks up my thinking, and then I have to reread and get my flow again. And I think we all end up at the end under, 6 feet under and stuff. And it, what does it really matter? But like, I feel like I could sort of have my cake and eat it too. It's not like checking my email compulsively throughout the day adds a lot of joy to my life. It's just something I kind of do in this Pavlovian, or whatever Skinnerian way. And if I can say, well, what's my goal? I don't know if you've listened to Cal Newport and Deep Work or, some of his stuff. I mean, he's like a overachiever, but he went to MIT in computer science, and then he still has that, he's at Georgia Tech or something like that. But then he writes about, our undivided attention and the importance of it, and like doing really deep work takes sustained and focused attention. If you're trying to if you're a teenager trying to write an essay on Shakespeare, going back and forth between Snapchat and TikTok and your Shakespeare essay is not like ideal, I would say. And, if you can say, okay, I'll work for 30 or 45 minutes and then take a break, then I'll, check, I'd say, well, you probably have a better quality of essay. You'll probably get more done in less time. So to try to be strategic about it, I don't know. That's kind of my message there. It's not that it's like going to ruin your life, but if you want to get your homework done in a timely manner and have probably a higher quality, is that sustained attention is kind of an important thing. I mean, general agreement. I mean, where do you land there?
It's true. I mean, I think what he is saying is technically true. I mean, of course, but it also comes to this issue of like, what are the costs of it, in the same sense of like, if you are shooting for Harvard or Yale, then that strategy kind of makes sense. If you want to become a Supreme Court justice, which basically requires you to go to Harvard or Yale, which is also a whole other dialogue about class privilege and stuff, but anyway, we'll leave that one for another day. But if that's your goal, then I think that makes sense. But there's also the sense of, but that also probably is propelling people into becoming exactly the neurotic, joyless youth that we've been talking about earlier in the podcast. And on the other hand, if you're going to become a drone like 80% of people, nothing wrong with that. Then doing that may have no function. That turning in the C+ paper, and having some more fun doing it while you were doing it is just as good in terms of your life progression. You're going to become a carpenter or an auto mechanic or or something of that sort, office worker even. Who cares?
That doesn't pay the bills anymore now, Chris.
Do the minimum, and that's a whole other.
Right. I mean, that to me, like, I generally agree with what you're saying, because I find like this perfectionism and this stress to knock it out of the park is unhealthy. And I tell my clients, play the long game in life, don't sweat the small stuff. A lot of it comes out in the wash. You don't have to go to Harvard to be successful. There are many paths to, quote unquote success. But like this kind of rat race to me is intensified, like the cost of living, like, I don't know what it is in Florida, but like the house we bought in late 97 in our neighborhood, it's a decent neighborhood in Austin. I mean, it's about 8 times what we bought it for 25 years ago. I mean, the houses are averaging it, like not averaging, the entry in our neighborhood is like $1 million now. And like, you think, okay, you're a student coming out of school with student loans, if you have that, let's say you have, 50, 100,000, if you want to go to grad school, law school, medical school, whatever. But then you want to get you want to be a teacher or a firefighter or, just whatever, carpenter. And you want to afford $1 million house in Austin? Sorry, you can't do it anymore. Like it's crazy. And you have a student loan to pay back, and like grocery bills, inflation. And so this like, well, let's just, do good enough and get some B's and C's in high school, and we'll go to community college, and then we'll move our way back. It's like, well, it could, but like stuff's so expensive. You need a really high paying job in order to live in some of these premier cities, Boston, San Francisco, Austin. I mean, everything's going up, and it's like wages aren't increasing accordingly. I haven't seen like a graph, but like, so then that kind of idea of play the long game, just, it's like, no, I need to put my kid in the best schools. They need to get the best education. They need 5 or 6 AP classes. They need to get in the best college. They need all the SAT prep. They need, it's like, ooh, yeah, I'd love to see some good data on, success and happiness. Like, I mean, I don't even have a position here. I'm sort of just complaining or venting. I don't know what I'm doing, but like, what I'm saying? Like that, like, how do you reconcile with, hey, just relax and take it easy, play the long game with this kind of increase the finances, the numbers? I'm just like, with the way how is anybody going to be able to afford anything after a while? It just seems nuts.
Yeah. I mean, that's a complicated issue. I wish we could say we're going to solve that.
Come on, Chris.
The podcast.
Come on, you're supposed to deliver here.
Yeah, we're really talking about an income inequality issue, which of course is very serious, and the U.S. in general has the income inequality issue compared to even other industrialized nations. So, I mean, that's a big policy, sort of issue to which there's not really an easy solution. I don't think that making our kids more neurotic so that they make $1 million a year isn't necessarily the right solution. Maybe that's a controversial thing to say, but
it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. I mean, I get it. As parents, we kind of both want them to make a lot of money and somehow still be happy, but we may have to recognize that this sort of, these things, the problem is it becomes this like mission creep, right? That if you say, well, the average kid getting into a good school is doing this, then I'll just have my kid do a little bit more. And then, the other parents figure out, well, if that's now becoming the mean, what's going to happen, then I'll have to make my kid do more. And then it just creeps up. The mean just keeps changing.
Yes. Yeah.
And eventually our kids are going to have to like cure cancer or, I don't know, fly to the moon or something. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you've probably seen it with grad students, like to get into grad school. Like now, like the undergrads are having multiple publications and stuff before they enter. Yeah. I'm like, what?
They have to do like actual science, not just learn about it. It's kind of crazy. It is. I mean, it's beneficial for me because then I get workers in my lab. But it's still a nutty thing that in many respects. I mean, that's that mission creep. And if you kind of look at like, why is everybody neurotic today? Well, I mean, I have to think that's part of it. It may not all of it.
Right. One facet. Feeds in there somewhere. And
I do think we need to have like a life course where people can get a trade, that not everybody is like meant to go to Harvard, and that's okay. That doesn't mean they're lesser people, but we treat them like they are. And the sense of like, if you're in the working class now, which used to be a thing that people took with pride, that you're somehow an undesirable, what was Hillary Clinton's quote? Was it basket of deplorables?
Yeah. Basket of deplorables. Yeah.
That's how we're treating, at one point people say, oh, income inequality is bad, but then you just turn around and say, oh, these deplorable working class people. Well, you're kind of contributing to it, if that's your attitude, somewhat. And I think we do need to I think this is a whole other politics. I think globalization is a real problem. I think some of the populism on the right and left have a point to make. I'm not a populist necessarily myself, but I think there are some fair points about globalization and people being left behind and the working class and that kind of stuff. So there's all that kind of stuff. I think we really do need to have these kind of like trade schools where you don't have to take literature, or the humanities. You just learn your trade, and that trade should come with a salary that is reasonable. That as a working class individual, you may not have a McMansion, but you have a house you can be proud of, and you can keep your kids, well fed and send them to a decent school and all this kind of stuff, which used to be the case. I mean, they'd be even as far back as the 70s, used to be a doable, and maybe
Right.
even the 80s used to be a doable thing. But now is actually, increasingly difficult to manage that. But I think that's a problem we need to fix. And the sense of like every kid has to like have their schedule maximized with sports and extra in debate team and
Right.
their world, mock UN, and 4.0 plus, GPAs with AP courses and volunteering on the side. I think, of course, this is crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Like, these are, like I said, we all, in 100 years, nobody will remember any of our names. Every accomplishment we will have done, it will be gone.
Well, and if they do remember our names, we won't know about it because
we won't know
dead.
about it anyway. Yeah. So why are we pushing people to be this neurotic? I mean, we obviously don't want people to be complete slackers either, because that can be a problem. But why are we pushing people to just like destroy themselves over being quote unquote the best, and just dedicating themselves completely to producing as many widgets as possible when they're in middle school, and wonder then why everybody's miserable. I think that that culture is we should be like France. I mean, don't they have like I don't know, they just kind of hang out and drink wine all the time, and they're okay.
Well, the Danes, they're one of the happiest. My wife is half Danish, so my mother-in-law's Danish, and I've visited Denmark a couple times, and I was like, man, the vibe there is really cool. And then they had their 37-hour work weeks and 6 weeks of vacation, and all that, and they travel, and they just at the end of the day, people hang out at the pub, and they just talk, and a lot of family time, and I was like, I really like that. It wasn't as pressured, let me get ahead of everyone else. In fact, it kind of there's a big middle, that acceptable level. In fact, if you're too aggressive, people look down upon it. You're like, hey, slow down, just chillax a little bit. And we got like the Wolf of Wall Street and all that stuff going on.
And I get it. I mean, nobody's like, we have this world emergency, let's call in the Danes, I mean, so there's that aspect of it too, but so what? I mean, they're happy. I think they are if you look at like the happiness index, I think they're one of the happiest, cultures, so I think we can be a little bit more like that, and relax a little bit. And I understand we're all worried like China's going to surpass us or whatever else. And maybe that might happen. There's a lot of them, first off, we can't keep up in population.
Right.
So maybe that will happen.
We have to work really hard if we want to catch them on the population. I think they got a pretty big head start.
They do have population decline now. So that might eventually actually work. So we have it turns out not a huge percentage of people are trying to immigrate to China, which probably isn't a shocker. But so with immigration, we actually are continuing to expand our population, whereas China at this point, I think, is beginning to retract, or at least getting very closely to retraction. But so I actually am more optimistic. I don't actually think in the end China will necessarily surpass the West. But for a variety of reasons, some of it having to do with population decline, some of it that nobody really wants to live in an autocratic regime. But so I think there'll be some bumpers at least on China's expansion at some point, but that might require the U.S. to work more closely with Australia and Europe and New Zealand, that kind of stuff, and Japan and South Korea, not North Korea, but South Korea, in order to do that. But I think the sense of like, it is that like Protestant work culture I think we're still dealing with to some extent, that we expect people to work maximally with relatively few rewards, whether that's vacation time or pay or minimum income, that kind of stuff. And I think politically a lot of these things would be popular. I mean, like, you look at like in Florida, which voted for Trump in 2020, but also voted for like the $15 minimum income per hour rate of income. I think a lot of these things would be popular politically if either party could come down from insanity and figure out how to put.
Well, there's the problem I think we both agree on. So like just kind of tying some of this to screens as we kind of jump from like some of these societal pressures and stuff, this intensity And, we can't blame it all on screen. Some of it, like, we're wearing it because there's this creep from, decade to decade of like, we got to up our game, up our game, up our game. And that we're starting to wear it. And then with our politics, these complicated problems is because we're so polarized, we're not meeting in the middle to work together to solve these there's just a lot of finger pointing. And you suck, and here's why, and we're smart, and the negative partisanship. And now it's like, it's betrayal to even like reach across the aisle. And,
absolutely.
And I'm like, do people not get that we need to work together to try to solve complicated problems? Like, you're not going to have one side have the complete right answer and the other side completely wrong. Or the other is, this side's right answer is this side's wrong answer. So, you cannot force one down the other's throat and say, no, it's like, no, there's whatever you think is the right answer. There's half the population of America thinks it's the wrong answer. And, you've got to like figure out the nuance and try to work together for the greater good. But it seems like that it's like a scorched earth thing. Like, we're going to double down on our side. And that's the part where I like to be hopeful, but I'm like, what are the mechanics? What can help us undo the problem that we see unfolding before us? And I don't see, anyone, Biden was like, oh, we'll reach across the aisle. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, the other side doesn't want to. They don't want you to have any wins. They don't want you to be up for reelection and say, I got a lot of my agenda, push forward because I was able to reach across the aisle successfully and look at all this stuff. Well, then the other side's going, well, crap, our candidate isn't going to win because we helped you be successful. And it's like, well, but we got to, that's the kind of thing that is driving me bananas. And I, try to tweet, like, I don't want to be toxic. I don't want to, I don't want to be zinging the other side and saying you're idiots. And, then I'm part of the problem, and it's like, I don't want to be part of that. I don't hate Republicans, and I don't think Democrats are all, it's like, people are people. So why should it be that you and I should get along so awfully?
All these pop culture references. I think it's also, in fairness, I think it's not just that, I do believe Biden, at least historically, is a centrist and, bipartisan, but, I think it's not only that the Republicans are opposed to any concessions, which I think you're absolutely correct about that, but I think also his own side doesn't want him to reach across the aisle either.
Right. Each side is guilty. And when you start to say but the other side's more guilty, I'm like, look, don't start in that. It's like, why pick at this? Like, why don't pick at the splinter in your brother's eye when there's a plank in your own? You got to look in the mirror and work on your problems. Like, quit offloading and trying, and I say this to client, and when I present, it's like, when you're in a spat with your partner about something, you don't start, you're 57% at fault and I'm only, 43 or whatever, you have to just say, okay, we got a problem here. What do we do to fix it? And if you have to make apologies and stuff, you do. But like, trying to figure out who's more to blame is like a dead end to trying to move things forward. And it's like, we got to get over that, what the heck?
Well, if you look at a lot of these like big polarizing debates, which are occurring on social media, just trying to keep that screen tie in there.
The tie-in.
But a lot of them really involve this like black and white thinking, right? It's like, like to do another Monty Quothon quote. It's like either on the abortion debate, like every sperm is sacred, or like the vagina somehow sprinkles like pixie dust on fetuses as they come through the birth canal, and then they become human at that moment, or like, there's no such thing as transsexualism. It's all made up falsehood,
Right.
or there's no difference whatsoever between a trans woman and a biological natal woman, for instance. We have to pretend there's no difference,
Right.
whatsoever, and that, like, the trans swimmer who's like shattering records in women's sports is like, it just happened that way,
Right.
And I think a lot of these things will, like, mask a tyranny, or else like you're killing grandma if you take one off at any point in your life. So a lot of this is like really extreme, like black and white thinking. And then, and like I said, even with this, like, stupid thing I put on Twitter about the abortion debate, saying I was kind of like saw both sides.
Yeah.
People are really disincentivized to do that because someone will call you a bigot of one sort or another,
Right.
whether it's the right doing it or the left doing it. Someone will say you're a horrible person. So occupying that central ground, there's like not like a constituency for that,
Right.
So it's difficult. I mean, there is, but which is actually most people, but they're not the ones that are on Twitter, getting a lot of attention, unfortunately. So in terms of like what happens in terms of a debate, if we're dumb enough to have a debate about abortion on Twitter, you're going to have your constituent of red meat, like partisans, who are going to defend you, and you're going to have the evil people who are on the other side who are opposing you. And most people are going to be like, well, screw this. I'm not getting in the middle of this. Is like two pit bulls fighting.
Yeah.
Why would I stick my hands in the middle of this?
Yeah.
But the problem is, then all everybody hears is the pit bulls.
Yes.
They think the world is made up of pit bulls, and this kind of stuff.
But we as moderates are not passionate enough to like force our reasonableness.
That's the point of being in some ways moderate. We're not passionate about my point is that we want not passionate people making decisions.
Is that reasonable?
And so that was my comment. I did this one thing I did want to qualify when I said, well, I don't have a say in the abortion debate because I'm a dude. Well, maybe that's better. I don't mean to say it, to be very clear that being male is the issue. It's they having the dispassionate sort of opinion that really I think is the advantage, which could be both men, women, or anybody. That we really want to look for dispassionate leaders who are able to look at the data, that are not super emotionally invested in any of these, debates. And that doesn't mean that one side is better than the other one. The ideal is to take, if you have like the abortion debates, take some supporters of abortion, take some supporters who are pro-life, who are willing to say, like, I'm willing to look at the data, I'm willing to make negotiations, I'm willing to reach across, and we can work out some compromises here that might make sense. None of us are going to get 100% of what we want, but maybe both sides will manage to get 70%.
I think you put them in the Thunderdome and you let them duke it out, right? What about my solution?
It's like with a lot of the trans stuff. I mean, there's got to be a way that, like, they call them the gender critical feminists, who are sort of opposed to a lot of the transgender movement, and of course you have the very radical transgender activists, who I don't think represent the average transsexual or transgendered individual. But again, I think a lot of these debates, like with women's sports, for instance, there's got to be a compromise somewhere in this. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like this, you take 10 people who are able to calm down, put them in a room together on both sides, 10 people on both sides, who are not the ones that are like dogpiling people on Twitter or this kind of thing, but they're actually willing to be reasonable about it. They're advocating for their cause, but they understand the other people are coming from their perspective with good faith. And I got to believe that rational human beings can find a fix to this sort of thing. It's not going to be perfect. A lot of these issues are just complicated, and there isn't a perfect fix, necessarily. There's not a magic wand to wave. But sometimes that's how compromise works, is people get 70% of what they want. They're not going to get all of it, and you have to kind of deal with that. And that's how cultures succeed, is when people can give up a little bit of what they want in order to allow the other side to get some of what they want, so everybody can kind of feel like they're in the same boat together. And unfortunately, that's not what we're doing. And if I was going to criticize social media for one thing, as I do sometimes think that the worst of these political memes, I hate it. These political
I know.
Memes, but I try to convince people not to share them. And that's actually a very difficult conversation sometimes too. But because they're just awful. So I think there is an element of social media that is maybe a small piece of this puzzle. I don't think that if you took social media away, it would necessarily fix everything, because we can look at other periods in history where people were just or more partisan. January 6th is bad. I'm not going to downplay it. It's a bad thing, and it's an embarrassment to our country. But I mean, you can look at like the riots in the Roman Empire and think, well, I mean, I guess I prefer January 6th to that, where, thousands of people died in, some of these riots and stuff like that,
I'll
chaos.
prefer that, but I'll prefer no
If you
attack
made
on
me
the Capitol.
pick,
Yeah,
that's okay.
yeah. I only had A and B, but if there was a C option that was
The
like
option
that,
to have none of these things. Yeah. So
I think one of the things that I've blogged about and done, some research on, well, one, just like the polarization and the tribalism and all that stuff, and trying to understand it, because one cannot argue that there isn't some friction going on, so we've got to understand what's going on and how to work through it. But like the thing that really bothers me is like, it's not just the other person's wrong, is they're bad, they're evil, they're, and that gets talked about. And, if you politically different than me and I'm on one side and the other, if we actually met each other, we could start to break down some of the barriers, and maybe calm. But like, if I don't know you, you're not just wrong, you're bad, you're evil, you're out to destroy America. And, I've shared some of those that I got so much, and you were nice enough, even before I posted this, "Did Democrats Hate America?" Blog that I did. And I still get those. And, my favorite worst one was, yes, the Demic rats do hate America. The only good Demic rat is a dead Demic rat. And I'm like, okay, I know that's fringe and that's not representative of most, but I'm like, there's people who really feel that way, and their passions are inflamed, and the, the left and right, and on the media, how they're portrayed as the libtards, and, and I'm like, I don't want to hate anybody. I don't want to hate, Republicans. It's like, what I look at is, well, life's complicated. People have different values. They have different views of things. They're trying the best they can. But this trying to understand what's going on is, I think, tribalism trumps truth. We didn't evolve to see reality. We evolved to survive. And a lot of that was your loyalty to your tribe, because if you didn't get along with your tribe and were cast out, that might be the end of you. So you needed to figure out that loyalty was kind of a big thing, and integration. And so you distort reality in ways that keep your tribal allegiance strong. Is my, kind of way to think of it. And so like, if you're trying to talk about nuance and stuff and trying to see this other side is, oh, they're people, they have some different ideas, we need to compromise. Well, now you're not being loyal, and it's like, well, and I don't want to just target Republicans, but Liz Cheney and the other, there you get primaried out. Like, you can't speak the honest opinion. I bet if it were a anonymous poll, that many Republicans, that was out of hand, and that's we need to change that, and then it turns into, no, actually they were just tourists, and they were just sightseeing at the Capitol and stuff. And if you say, I actually think Trump lost, and and you're a Republican, it's like, not just you get primaried out, you may get death threats, your family death threats, they'll find you, they'll post your address and stuff like that. And I saw this, it was a documentary on Netflix, and I'll have to think of what it was. And it just escapes me. But one of the things that they did that was showing this kind of tribalism that stuck out, and, listeners, I'll see if I can come up with the name of it, but it was on the effects of social media. It wasn't Social Dilemma, it was a different one. But they had soccer fans in Europe, football fans, European football fans, watching gameplay of highlights of their team or their bitter rival. And they had them, hooked up to, brain stuff and, measuring. And one thing they found is, the people's like pleasure centers in their brain, when the other team, they had clips of their rival team screwing up, was more rewarding to them than watching epic plays of their own team. And I was like,
Yeah.
Whoa. Well, that
Yeah.
to me explains a lot. We get more pleasure out of the
Yeah.
failures of our rivals than we do the successes of our own
Yeah.
side. I mean, it's a blanket statement, but
Yeah.
that's powerful. And
Yeah.
it's like, we want to see egg on their face. We want
Yeah.
that feeling. And I'm like, ooh, that's not good.
Yeah.
That's hard to escape, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Humans are, unfortunately, basically terrible. I'll leave you with this last optimistic thought. I have to pop off after this.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think and I was just talking to a reporter the other day, was kind of raising this, says, well, you know, a lot of it's the anonymity of the internet, and this wouldn't happen face to face. Like, yes, it would. If you look at like history, people were horrible to each other face to face all the time. You look at like, you know, fights in the Senate in the 19th century in the US. I mean, you can see, you look at like, you know, the Holocaust, that was all face to face. You know,
and
they
people used to see public executions as entertainment, you know,
people
beheadings.
They're terrible to each other face to face. You go to, I made the joke with the report. I said, you go to a faculty meeting, faculty will try to destroy each other. You know, people are just what's happening with social media is, you know, some of these like really weird people, like the person who wrote to you about the Democrats, whatever that, you know, that was, you know, the really people like really like dig the pencil into the paper when they write you a letter or whatever, you know. Mostly we don't hear from them, you know, historically, but now in social media they're everywhere, right?
Right.
You know, so we hear from them, and they now have, and unfortunately companies and politicians take them seriously. They think that if there's this like outcry that's mainly these people on Twitter, that this is somehow a crisis they need to deal with, rather than simply dismiss. And of course, none other than Wizards of the Coast has been, you know, guilty of this sort of thing. They think like, you know, the loudest voices on social media represent a real crisis they need to now apologize for, change their procedures for, this kind of stuff. And you forget that these people are crazy. You know,
they can punish you. Those loud voices can be very, very painful.
And they're not going to accept your apology, and they're going to just keep moving the goalposts. You're going to be rewarding them by if you give them what they want, they're not going to be happy. You're just this is Psych 101. If you reward the behavior, you're going to get more of it, not less of it.
Right.
You know, the only way to stop it is to shut it down and not give into it. You know,
and the extinction burst that if you try to shut it down, it'll increase, but you have to ride that out before they give up, and that's painful to do and hard to do. But I think we've covered tons of territory. It's been a real pleasure to discuss all this stuff with you, Chris. And you know, I hope listeners got some takeaways and nuggets from this. But I think one thing we're in agreement on, like, we can't throw screens under the bus. There's a lot of good that comes from ours. And yes, there's some downsides, but you know, if we can learn to use more of the positives and kind of, you know, minimize some of the negatives, that's a good goal to shoot for. But it's also very complicated and nuanced, and we can't oversimplify. And this black and white thinking gets us into a lot of trouble. And we need to learn to live with mystery a little bit more, and to try to live the nuance, and don't just buy the headlines. You got to look beneath the headlines, because the headlines are going to tell you a story that isn't often very accurate, or it's only part of the truth. It's not the greater. And we make a mistake of, oh, that's what it really is. And it's like, no, there's more to it. But that takes a little more work and time. So unless you're willing to do that, maybe reserve judgment a little bit and know that there's a deeper story behind some of the headlines. Yeah. Does that sound pretty good?
Yeah. I'm right on board with you. That sounds great.
Okay, we're going to change the world, Chris.
Change the world. One podcast at a time.
Yeah, one podcast at a time. Well, this has been a pleasure with Dr. Chris Ferguson of Stetson University, an expert on the effects of media. And then we pulled in some politics and history. We covered everything, you know, world peace, all of it. And, you know, we'll keep on. I'd say, like, for all listeners is, you know, think first before you react on social media and stuff, and think how you can do good with it. You know, focus on that of, you know, be kind, because as much as you say, those negative statements can be hurtful to people, you can be kind to people and supportive and say, oh, I really like that comment. I like this and that. And it's like, hey, let's emphasize this good part of it and quit getting stuck on the negatives. All right. Well, this has been The Reasonably Good Life. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brooks, and my sign out is be curious, be flexible, be kind, and for goodness sakes, be reasonable. And thanks a lot. We'll be in touch, Chris, and maybe we could do this again sometime.